There are 5 Texas Hold'em strategies that every beginner should know, and I know this because I had to learn these myself before I became a professional poker player. When I was first starting out, I had to learn many of these lessons that I'm going to teach you today the hard way, and I find that many of my students to this day still struggle with these. So if you're not quite getting the results that you want yet in your Texas Hold'em poker games, follow these 5 strategies, and I think you're going to start having a lot more success. All right, so counting down from 5 to 1, here we go. Number 5 is aggressive players win. Guys, the biggest mistake that most Texas Hold'em amateurs make is playing too passive. I still see this all the time, whether you're playing in small stakes cash games, $1, $2, or you're playing a 5-cent, 10-cent cash game on the internet, small buy-in tournaments, and so on. Most players these days still play way too passively, and I'm going to show you why that is a massive mistake right now. So the first thing you guys need to know is that everybody gets dealt the same amount of good hands and bad hands over the long run in Texas Hold'em, and so therefore if everyone just played their cards face up, there would be no winners or losers. If you happen to get some good hands one day, you would win. If you got some bad hands one day, you would lose. So the key to succeeding in Texas Hold'em is being able to take more pots away from people when you don't have a good hand, and the only way that you can do that is by playing aggressively. So simply put, you gotta want it more than them sometimes. Let me give you an example right now. So you raise it up with the Ace of Hearts, Queen of Clubs, and a tag calls you. Now tag in poker is one of my 5 major poker player types. Tag stands for tight and aggressive, and this is one of the better players in your games that you'll see at the tables these days. So the flop comes down with the 10 of diamonds, 8 of spades, and 5 of hearts. They lead into you, and by leading I mean they bet into you. What should you do in this situation? Well, we know that this player plays a relatively tight range. They're playing decent hands overall, but the other key factor here is that this is an aggressive player, and what that means is that they're going to bet into us here some of the time with bluffs. So what should you do here? Well, you want to raise sometimes here even though we have nothing at all, because we know that most of the time, in fact 2 out of 3 times in poker in Texas Hold'em, you don't flop anything at all. So even if this player does have a pair, say they've got a hand like 8-7 for example for middle pair, they're not feeling so hot when we pull off the big raise here. And the real key to your success, even if they call you here, is that on the turn and river we're often going to be applying a lot more pressure, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more coming up later on in the video. But bottom line guys, always remember that aggressive poker is winning poker. Sometimes you need to take a hand like Ace Queen, which doesn't have anything on this board, and simply make a raise versus an aggressive player and try to take the pot away from them. All right guys, moving on to Texas Hold'em strategy number 4, and that is to understand that position is king. So guys, I've talked about this one endlessly on the channel here, and I'll tell you straight up that a mediocre player will beat a good poker player any day of the week if they have position in every single hand, and that is because they get to act last, which is a massively proven statistical advantage in the game of poker, because you always need to remember that poker is a game of incomplete information. We are always guessing about their hand and they are guessing about our hand, so the person who gets to act last simply has an information advantage. When I check, for example, I'm giving away some information to the other person that maybe I don't have a very strong hand. It could be that I'm slow playing, and we're actually going to talk about that in a second, but most of the time when somebody checks in poker or just calls, it means that their hand is not very good. So this is why getting to act last is so important. Let me give you an example once again. You raise it up pre-flop with a nice suited connector, the 10 of diamonds and the 9 of diamonds. By the way, I should mention, if you want to know all of the hands that I suggest playing in Texas Hold'em, there are charts and diagrams in my free poker cheat sheet showing you exactly what hands to play, and I will leave a link to that in the description below. But anyways, this is a nice little hand called a suited connector that I will often be playing, and a lag calls us. Now a lag stands for loose and aggressive, so this player is a little bit different than the one we just talked about. This player is playing a few more hands, playing some slightly trashy hands in some situations, but they're also playing aggressively once again. And the other player who calls us is the fish. We got 2 callers here, and And a fish is a recreational player. This is the kind of player who just plays for fun. They're playing all sorts of junky hands, complete trash. They love to call and get involved in the action. So the flop comes down with the king of diamonds, 4 of spades, and 3 of hearts. They both check to us. Remember, we have position in the hand here. We're talking about position. So what should you do here? Well, you should bet half the pot here, and this is a perfect illustration of why position is so vital in poker in Texas Hold'em. I hope you guys already noticed here. Once again, we have absolutely nothing on this board. We do technically have a backdoor flush draw. If it came diamond, diamond on the turn and river, we would make a flush. And we technically have a backdoor straight draw, I guess, as well. If it came with a queen and a jack, for example, on the turn and river, we would also make a straight. But guys, for all intents and purposes here, we don't have anything, but that doesn't matter because the absolutely crucial part of this hand is that they've both checked already. And also this board is really not very connected at all. This is actually a perfect board for us as the pre-flop raiser to continue on because we have a lot of kings in our range. I know I'm getting a little bit technical here, but basically when you raise pre-flop, which we did in this hand, they're going to be putting us on a lot of big cards like an ace, a king, a queen. So a flop like this with the king 4-3 is a perfect flop for us to represent that we have that hand. You add in the fact that both of them have already checked. They're unlikely to have a strong hand on this board, and we have an easy bet here. And we just bet half pot, by the way. We don't need to bet a big amount, and we're often going to be able to pick up a pot like this with almost certainly the worst hand. We've only got 10 high, remember. And guys, this right here is the heart and soul of how to win at Texas Hold'em. Remember, we already talked about how everyone gets dealt the same amount of good and bad hands over the long run. Being able to take away pots like this from 2 other players who almost certainly have a better hand than us is absolutely the key to your success. All right, guys, let's move on to tip number 3 now for Texas Hold'em games, and that is to don't overplay overpairs. So guys, this is another one that my students struggle with mightily. We talk about this all the time, is amateurs often get married, as I call it, to their overpairs. I'm going to give you an example once again here. And basically an overpair in poker is when the flop comes down, which is the first 3 cards that the dealer puts in the middle. It's when you have a pair which is higher than the board. Guys, you always need to remember that the stack sizes in No Limit Texas Hold'em are often 100 big blinds or more. So for example, you're playing in a $1, $2 cash game. The big blind in that game is $2. So 100 big blinds would be $200. And what you need to understand is that in a situation like this, stacking hands are often 2 pair plus. Now, what do I mean by a stacking hand? Basically, what I mean is a hand that you're willing to commit all of your chips with. And the reason why I talked about 100 big blinds being the stack size, 100 big blinds or more, is because in a situation like this, most people are not going to be willing to put all of their chips in the middle unless they have at least 2 pair or more. 2 pair, trips, a straight, a flush, and so on. So an overpair is just 1 pair. You don't want to be going all in. Let me get to the example here. You've got 2 red 10s, the 10 of diamonds and the 10 of hearts. A nit calls you. Now, a nit is the tightest player at your Texas Hold'em table, so we want to be careful versus this player type. Flop comes down with the 7 of diamonds, 5 of spades, 4 of hearts. So this is the definition of an overpair here. We have a pair, 1 pair, which is higher than all the cards on the board. So they bet, you raise, they shove all in. What on earth is going on here, guys? Well, guys, I'm going to tell you that you need to be folding your hand here. Remember, we have a 1 pair hand, and like we just said, with stack sizes of 100 big blinds or more in No Limit Texas Hold'em, especially against this player type, an extremely tight and passive player, they are not going to be shoving all in here, guys, with a 1 pair hand. And if they do, it's going to be one of the 1 pair hands that beats us, like pocket aces, pocket kings, pocket queens, or pocket jacks, that perhaps they slow played pre-flop. But honestly, most of the time here, they're going to be shoving in with a hand like pocket 7s, which has top set on this board. That's 3 of a kind. Maybe they've got a hand like pocket 5s, pocket 4s, which also have sets on this board, or they flopped a straight with a hand like 6-8. Guys, bottom line, do not overplay your overpairs when the stacks are 100 big blinds or more in Texas Hold'em. Believe me, they are not shoving all in here with a hand like king 7 or something that you beat. Any competent player here is going to show up with a hand that beats yours in this situation. Do not overplay your overpairs. All right, guys, moving on to tip number 2 for Texas Hold'em games, and that is to never slow play versus passive players. So guys, as I talked about in my my first poker book, Crushing the Micro Stakes, big hand, big pot. This is one of the biggest mistakes that amateurs make these days, is when they finally hit a big hand, which doesn't happen very often in poker, they end up winning a tiny pot because they slow play versus passive players. Now let me define slow playing first. Slow playing is the act of just playing deceptively, playing your hand slow, checking, calling, disguising the strength of your hand. And guys, this is a massive mistake, especially in low stakes games versus passive players, because they're simply not going to bet. They're passive players. That's what they do. So let me give you an example. Once again, you raise up ace king, ace of diamonds, king of spades, and a tap player calls you. Now tap stands for tight and passive. This player is very, very common in today's games. In fact, it's going to be one of the most common players that you encounter in your Texas Hold'em games. Flop comes down with the ace of spades, 5 of hearts, and jack of diamonds. Awesome, right? We've got top pair, top kicker in this spot, so we're just going to make the most obvious play possible. We're going to bet, and they call. Okay, so they might have an ace in this spot. They might have a jack. We're still feeling pretty good. We know that our hand here is going to be the best hand most of the time. Turn comes down with the king of diamonds. Boom, we have 2 pair now. So what should you do in this spot? Well, guys, the biggest mistake that so many amateurs make these days is getting tricky here. They go for the check here, and they don't understand that a passive player like this is just going to check behind. And what you are doing is you are artificially keeping the size of the pot low, and you're simply costing yourself money in a situation like this. So guys, big hand, big pot. You've hit your 2 pair on the turn. Put your foot on the gas pedal here and make a big bet. Thank me later. This is how you win big versus passive players in low stakes Texas Hold'em games. All right, guys, moving on to my number 1 tip for Texas Hold'em games, and that is to always remember that game selection is everything. Guys, I've talked about this one endlessly here on the channel. You need to understand that poker is essentially a zero-sum game. And what I mean by that is that your profits are going to come from their losses. So the first question you might ask is, who loses big in poker? Well, that's an easy one. It's the fish. It's the recreational players. Those are the players who make the large fundamental mistakes, like limping a lot, playing a lot of trashy hands, chasing every draw. Guys, you're not going to win big in poker if your goal is to challenge all the best players. There's this weird myth out there these days that I still see on the internet sometimes and in card rooms where people say, oh, if I just move up the stakes and play against really good players, somehow I'll start winning. Guys, that doesn't make any sense at all. It's just like saying if I just go challenge LeBron James at basketball or Connor McDavid at hockey, that somehow I'm going to win. No, those are the best players in the world. You're not going to win against them. Instead, you want to be playing against the weak recreational players. So I have one rule at the poker table that is always in effect no matter what poker game I'm playing in, and that is that there is one clear fish at my table at all times, or else I leave. And I don't care if there's no tables left. If I'm playing live in the casino, if I don't see one clear recreational player, I leave the casino. Same thing with the poker site. If I don't find a clear recreational player at my table, I leave. Guys, when I sit down at the poker table, I am there to do a job. I am there to make money. I am there to get all of their chips, and I'm assuming that they're there to get my chips. So I want to play against the weak players who lose a lot of money. Once again, you want to look for players who are limping a lot, and that means just calling the blind pre-flop, playing all sorts of trashy hands. I've got multiple videos here on the channel talking about what hands to play, and also chasing every draw. All right, guys, like and subscribe if you found this video helpful. And by the way, if you want to know my entire strategy to beat Texas Hold'em poker games, make sure you grab a copy of my free poker cheat sheet. That'll be the top link in the description below. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. All the best at the poker tables, unless you're on mine.